Perfect. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Asha, for being here with a good friend of mine, Asha, who is an author, world lecturer, travels the world lecturing, talking about yoga, self-realization, and has helped found the Ananda communities. And she's a lifelong yogi. So we're excited to have her here today. Asha, thank you for being here with us.
I'm very happy to be here.
It's exciting. So I feel like I have so many things I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
Mostly it's like you've lived such a unique life,
Mm-hmm.
and before we go there into what you're doing now and
Mm-hmm.
you know some of the big chapters, I would like to just talk a little bit like what were the early years like? You're 18 to 20, 18 to 24. What was life like back then? Who was Asha then?
Well, I was born in 1947, so I was perfectly primed to be just in my late teens in the late 60s. And I was in California. In fact, I was in Northern California. So I was never a hippie because I was somehow too practical and too sensible. But I was the first in my crowd to drop out of college. And, you know, I was just sort of, I was like that. I was also from a Jewish family. And interestingly, Jews are always in the forefront of revolutionary social movements.
Really?
Yeah. I was a cultural Jew, not a religious one. But in fact, one of my older friends said to me, you know, that every Jewish family lost one, as they put it, you know, to the dropping out of college and the leaving it. And she said usually it was the most promising child. My family lost two, so I don't know. But lost in the sense of just looked at society as it was and decided it wasn't for me.
So is that what led to you dropping out?
I went to university, actually went to Stanford, which sounds more impressive than it was. In the 60s, you could get into Stanford like a normal human being could just get into that university. So I did as a normal human being. But my interest from the youngest age, I was always interested in the meaning of things, the philosophical meaning. I was always looking for, how to live. And for that, to me, that meant how to be happy, which was ironic in a sense because I was happy. But there was some just realization that life was serious, and serious in a positive way, but nobody was talking about those things. They were all just, it was all just about where you're going to go to school and what kind of a profession you're going to have. And in my case, I was sort of the last of the stage when women thought that if you had children, you didn't have a career, which didn't bother me at all because I didn't want a career. But it just nothing made any sense. And I sort of got, except theater. I was really active in theater. Who knows why? Yeah, that was the only thing I really enjoyed, I really liked and put energy into. I was very good in school, but school was effortless for me. So the fact that I could be good at it and would get praise for it actually made me a little crazy because I knew I wasn't doing anything.
Right.
I mean, now that I know about reincarnation, I just learned how to be what I call school smart somewhere along the way, and I could just be school smart, but it wasn't taxing me at all. So it made me feel like I can do nothing and get praised.
Right.
But what am I really supposed to do? So when I got into Stanford, which was sort of a surprise, I thought, well, I'll try. It took me about 2 weeks to decide that there was a lot of intelligence, there was probably a lot of skill, but there was no wisdom. I didn't encounter any wisdom, so I completely lost interest. After 2 weeks, I stayed the whole year. I was too young to realize how much it was costing my parents, and I was too young to think about anything like that, which would have been nice if I had. So I got A's and F's because I got an A if I went to class and did the work, and then I got an F when I lost interest and stopped going.
Right.
And I just played through the Grateful Dead, which of course became very famous later, was just forming, and they were forming right in Palo Alto, right where Stanford is.
Oh, wow.
So they played almost every Friday night, and I would just find out where they were.
Wow.
And we would just listen to them play and dance.
Yeah.
That was my college. It was awful. I mean, it was fun, but it was awful.
Yeah.
At the end of it, I think I flunked out. I'm not sure which way it went. I might have gotten myself reinstated by doing some of the work. but like I'd been home just a few days, and I'd heard about some friends from high school who had sort of kind of gone the direction that I had gone, and I went to see them, and immediately I met a few people who were very interested in Eastern religion.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that was like as soon as we were looking at Ramakrishna and his disciple Swami Vivekananda.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I read Vivekananda's book, I knew that this was it. It was like, this is it.
Yeah.
I was 18 just before my 19th birthday, and all of a sudden the whole mystery was solved. It was right here.
Was that your first exposure to Eastern thought, Eastern thinking?
Totally. Just there'd been a few psychedelics in there that gave me a clue that consciousness was really what I was after.
Yeah.
But nobody could tell me what to do about that except drugs, which I liked my brain, and I did not like experimenting on it.
Yeah.
So drugs were not, and besides I could tell that drugs were not the same as what I was looking for.
Right.
It was too unpredictable. And I was looking for freedom of choice, real freedom of choice. And when you put a drug into you, I felt like I lost freedom of choice, and I didn't like that.
Right.
I mean, that's why people like it, because it takes you.
Yeah.
But it only took just literally one experience for me to say, oh, change consciousness, change everything.
Right.
But how? So then when I met Vivekananda, it was like, oh, this is how.
Yeah. I mean, nobody really even talks about consciousness, at least in kind of Western philosophy. It's kind of like an assumed,
it's an assumed
background.
Thing. Well, one of the really things that turned me against university was I did take a class. It was called Consciousness. And I thought, whoa, we're actually going to talk about it. But what we did was we read very intellectual treatise by lots of different people and then discussed everybody's point of view and never made any attempt to actually understand the implications or the word true. The word true did not enter into the conversation. It was how many different opinions can we share?
Yeah.
It was just
colleges have a way of doing that, just sucking the fun out of.
It's sucking the fun out of.
One of my high school teachers, he told us in his college there was a class called social deviation. He's like, oh, that'll be cool. I'll learn about all these social deviants and just like kind of wild stuff. He said they just studied statistics and like, oh, he said it was the worst class ever.
Yeah, it's really.
Yeah.
Education, unfortunately, needs to be basically just thrown away and started over.
Mm.
I was reading just something about some state in the United States that's trying to conquer it by absolutely structuring all the instruction in the room. And the illustration had a teacher and a time clock. You know, like 12 minutes on this and 10 minutes on that.
God.
Can you imagine? It's just like as if the children were just widgets being
Yeah,
sent out
robots.
of a machine. Nothing. And it said that the students and the teachers hate it.
I mean, who would? Yeah, who would enjoy something like that? I had Nitai on a few weeks ago, and we talked a lot about education for life and just what a dynamic experience it offers people, and just how different. And it's really seems to be taking off in India, which is really encouraging. And as a teacher in one of those education for life schools, it's so much more fun. I actually was. When I would shadow some teachers when I was in college, they literally said, don't do it. They said, do something else, run.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so disheartening, isn't it?
Yeah. And it says, what do you do now?
Well, you would start an educational revolution, which is what Education for Life is.
Mm-hmm.
All of Ananda, all of Yogananda's teachings, it's a revolution. There's no other word for it.
Mm.
It's not even a new movement. It's a total revolution where you just take what was and you don't follow it anymore. You just do what makes more sense. Our culture's become so confused, and there's no worse area than education. I'm wildly intent about it, partly from my own experience. I did 13 years of school, of course, left at, I cannot think of a single thing I learned. Not one. I was precocious, so I didn't even need to be taught to read. I started out knowing how. But I can't think of a single meaningful or useful thing that I learned in all those years. And not all my teachers were terrible.
Right.
Well, I lost interest. I think it was the 4th grade. my teacher's name was Mrs. Pugh. And I have to say, you have to admire someone named Pugh with the courage to become an elementary school teacher.
You're asking for it.
Yeah, really. But they were giving us something like a science lesson. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
I think, what are you, 10 in the 4th grade? And she said, these are the conditions that are required for life. I don't know. I mean, I took it in so little, like oxygen and stuff like that. So she said, and there is no condition anywhere except on planet Earth like this. Therefore, there's no life anywhere else. Okay, I didn't even notice the assumption that these conditions didn't exist. I raised my hand. Couldn't there be a form of life that had adapted to other conditions? I mean, like, I'm 10 years old. Of course there. And she says, no. And I was like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life?
Yeah.
But how awful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny now, but it wasn't funny then.
Yeah.
But it wasn't an existential crisis, but it was just like, you're supposed to be my teacher.
Right.
There must be a better answer than no. Yeah.
We think so many people I think they just go through life on kind of autopilot, and they just accept what they're told. They don't really question and then just move on and just kind of things carry forward like that.
Yeah, until there's a deviation.
Mm-hmm.
The way Swami Kriyananda would talk about it, let's see. Society just runs in a straight line like this. And then he said every social movement that's had an impact, he said a group of people, often a very small group of people, gather together and they create a magnetic whirlpool like this. And then gradually the river of society gets pulled into it. And then it begins to flow through that center.
Right.
I mean, at the age that I am, and having been on what some people call it the cutting edge. My favorite, I prefer the lunatic fringe. On the lunatic fringe of society, I spent most of my time out there, and I've watched what was radical become central.
Right.
And then you have to move over again.
Yeah.
And Swami would often talk about Ananda in that context, that it's a small group of people band together, but because the majority of people do not exert conscious will in the direction that they're going, they just go with the tide. A very small group of people who's exerting conscious will, not to influence necessarily, but to create magnetism, can actually pull off society into it. Because it just from my own experience, I became a vegetarian that summer when I was 18 to 19. One of my relatives was sure that I was going to die. And I had to submit to a medical doctor, everything that I ate, what my whole diet was, because they wanted to prove to me that this was awful. And the doctor pronounced it the healthiest diet he'd ever seen, and thought that they would all be dead and I'd still be going strong, which was fortunate because if he'd said otherwise, I just would have still said no. But nowadays,
right, yeah.
Recently when I was traveling, I was in Lithuania, which from the point of view of California, you don't think of Lithuania being, a culture-forward place, but there were vegan restaurants all around.
Wow.
We have multiple choices of vegan restaurants. Not even vegetarian, vegan.
Right.
When did that happen? How did that happen?
Yeah.
It's just there were people gathered, and it just pulled society into it.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about, because you have a unique perspective, both with your life experiences and also your travels that go around. And it's it's almost like a cliche now, but a spiritual revolution, an awakening that's talked about all the time. And maybe you could talk, what's your perspective on that? And what does that really mean, and how is that coming about, and some of your experiences?
Well, bear in mind, I hear wonderful stories about Christian missionaries who just walk into a foreign country without a friend, and just wait for Jesus to open doors. I don't do that. I'm invited by like-minded souls. So I always start with a nucleus of somebody. But what I am discovering is partly what I was talking about. Every place I've been, and I've been to quite a few places now, not everywhere on the planet by any means, but there's just a change of consciousness happening. I mean, vegan restaurants is a small way of saying it, but sort of like everywhere I go, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things that reflect a different understanding than just materialism, and a different understanding than looking out for just me, and if I'm okay, that's enough. Some of it is quite central to the kind of spiritual life that I've lived. There's a lot of that. Yoga, of course, is just everywhere. But there's also just people doing bright new things in bright new ways that all are reflective of the fact that they're seeing the world from a different perspective. I've been doing a lot of travel for the last maybe 3 years. I don't have a very good sense of time, but 3 or 4 years maybe. And I used to be very pessimistic. I mean, on a global scale, I'm immensely pessimistic, but in terms of just how people are thinking. But now I'm very optimistic because there's so much inspired action in small and large ways. Just creative actions, creative work, creative writing, creative art, and explicitly spiritual. So you have it's a new age. This is what Yogananda asserts. We're really rising into an age that's very different from our history, and it shows.
Right.
But of course, we're also polarizing as a society. So Yogananda also said that the transition will not be effortless, and we can see that. Just have to look at almost any country in the world right now, and you see where it's going.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We were just talking to, where was she from? Oh, she was from Canada, a guest that's staying here now. And just talking about how they're viewing their politics, and then America last, who knows, 12, 20 years, always conflicts. And around the world, it's almost like it's happening everywhere.
It is happening everywhere. Yeah, I was in Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. I came back from there just before the end of the year. Those countries all border on Russia. And they've all been conquered and escaped from Russian domination several times in the course of their national history. And their perspective on things is really quite different because that whole, at times often very aggressive empire, which has also become aggressive again, is right there. And so their awareness of the precariousness, and yet at the same time, in the early 90s, several of those countries, Latvia and Lithuania, I think also Estonia, Finland's always been independent, but they've only been established free of the Soviet Empire for 40 years. It's like half of one generation. And they're going great guns toward independence and prosperity and freedom of thought and so on. But right here is this shadow, and it's an extremely interesting time to live in and extremely insecure. So there's a lot of light in those countries. It's trying to, and then there's this enormous shadow force on the edge.
Yeah.
I mean, that country just stretched across its border, and it could just stretch across its border again, and these are small countries.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you were seeing that change reflective through, like you said, education, politics, just government, borders, health, foods, and things like that. What is behind that? We're seeing it expressed through these different forms. Right. What is generating that change?
Well, according to Yogananda and his guru Sri Yukteswar, globally, planets, and this is ancient wisdom from India, planets go through higher and lower vibrations. And it's an astronomical phenomenon. It's not astrology. You think of these things as being woo-woo astrology, because we talk about the age of Aquarius and all that, but this is not. This is physical science. This are verified physical science facts. That there's a tremendous energy source at the center of the galaxy, and our planet Earth is on an elliptical orbit. It has a dual that holds it. Question of the dual is a little less verified, but nonetheless they're suspecting it. It goes. We're moving in an elliptical orbit which causes planet Earth to move closer and then farther away from the galactic center. The closer planet Earth comes to the galactic center, the more energy is coming to this planet, and therefore the more dynamic and wide awake and subtle people's perception is.
Right.
And this whole cycle to go toward the galactic center and away from it is 24,000 years. 12,000 years of ever increasing enlightenment, 12,000 years of decreasing enlightenment. We are, because one always wants to know, the nadir was 500 AD, and there's 4 ages ascending and the same 4 ages descending. They go from matter to energy to thought to spirit. We've been in matter. We're just starting into energy. Energy really started in 1900. And what characterizes the last now 125 years is subtler and subtler forms of energy. When automobiles were first invented and they wanted to explain what an automobile was, the motor, if you remember, was horsepower.
Right.
5 horsepower, 100 horsepower, because a person knew how strong a horse was.
Right.
So if this motor can do the work of 5 horses, that meant something to them. Now, I don't even know if they use that measurement anymore, but 5 horses?
Yeah, well, I have no idea what that means.
but everything was physical.
Right.
And now, you have these little watches and everything, there's all this energy from all these other places. And we're energizing our consciousness too. Now, the important thing to realize about this is a physical phenomenon on a planet. And but the real drama of creation is individual awakening. The planet does not become self-realized. Right.
Not automatic.
Right. So individual souls inhabit the planet, and we, I being one of them, chooses to incarnate on a planet where it's going through the right cycle for what I myself need. Now, bear in mind, Jesus incarnated at the worst possible time, getting worse.
Right.
So the evolutionary awareness of the planet doesn't make people automatically aware.
Right.
But you'll come for whatever your karma requires. Someone like myself, like us, I would say us, we came to help with this transition. We're revolutionaries by nature. Yeah. And so we came where there was the opportunity for a revolution, and also the possibility of tremendous difficulty on the planet. I hope we're here to help. We might just be here to be annihilated, but we'll find out which one it is.
Well, that brings me to a question I wanted to ask. What would you say to somebody, because you say we're in the ascending arc,
Right.
which think out, because 12,000, that's a long descent. I wouldn't want to be there.
Bear in mind, when you incarnate the planet, you're not stuck.
That's true.
It's like you die, you go to the astral world, and from the astral world, you decide whether or not Earth is still your planet. Kriyananda asked Yogananda, his guru, do we always come back to the same planet? Yogananda said, oh no. He said there are countless inhabited planets. I mean, contrary to my great
Miss
teaching.
Pugh.
Miss Pugh, right. There's countless inhabited planets.
Right.
And so we say, what would serve my individual spiritual expansion?
Right.
And then we incarnate where it would.
So what would you say to somebody that finds it hard to believe we're in an ascending cycle, because they look around, they see chaos and destruction around them?
Well, but also think how the world has changed since 1900. You could be, in 1900 you would be in a horse-drawn carriage. And by 1970 you were in a jet airplane. And go back hundreds of years. Did you ever see such shifts like that? No. So it's just this hugely accelerating this shift from material forms of energy to more subtle forms of energy. However, and you see, this is an ancient tradition. I'm not just making this up. This has been the tradition of India forever. Bear in mind, in India at this time, they don't know we're in transition. Yogananda brought this as a clarification, but they know the concept. But transitions are tumultuous because a whole tremendous momentum of how things are done, plus a whole lot of stuff. There's just a lot of stuff. I used to wonder, like, what's going to happen to all this stuff? But then I thought about nuclear war, and that really solves it very quickly. But there's also transition ages, like this one is especially between Dwapara and Kali, which is between energy and matter. The whole epic of the Mahabharata is the same transition between the age of energy and the age of matter, but going down. And so when this transition happens, presumably especially between these two ages, which are the two lowest of the four ages, it's an opportunity for a lot to be destroyed in order to be changed. And therefore, the way I think about it is, okay, there's a lot of elements here.
Right.
Every soul is equally dear to God, not just the nice ones. In our Festival of Light, which Anand has every Sunday, God loves everyone equally, not just Jesus and Krishna and Babaji, but even those who have sinned most greatly, because we all are made of the same divinity, and we're just playing in the mud puddle. And even the one who is completely covered in mud, in their own nature, is no less divine.
Right.
This is the only difference between a saint and the worst criminal is the way they behave. I mean, truthfully, that's a very compelling thought when you stop and think about it. That the worst criminal, if they have a revelation, if they come to Jesus or come to Krishna, whoever they come to, and then reforms, they suddenly are as good as anyone. It's only the way they behave. So the other part of this, and this is all the way things are, this is Sanatana Dharma, is we reincarnate many times. And the reason we incarnate is because we have to learn what really brings happiness and what really causes suffering. And if you find yourself at a point where you're repelled by a certain number of actions because it's transparently obvious to you that those will not bring happiness. The drug scene that I saw in the late 60s, a lot of the people I knew ended up on heroin, of all things, which was completely incomprehensible at the beginning. But it was like there wasn't the slightest chance that I would ever have gone that way. But I understand the attraction of it, but I also can just see through it. How do I know that? According to Yogananda's teaching, because I've been there, I've done that. Swami would never use slang. In fact, you don't realize how the vibration of slang, but every once in a while Swami would use a slang expression, and he would always say it in such a way. There was the expression, the pits, which means things are really awful. And I remember Swami was saying it wasn't a very pleasant experience. And then he sort of gathered himself and said, in fact, it was the pits. He said, it was just so funny.
Let me make sure I got this right.
Yeah, exactly. But the one slang expression, he didn't use it, but he liked it, was been there, done that. And that really explains it.
Right.
Been there, done that. And learned that it's not going to make me happy. Willing to be honest and ask the question, what will make me happy? Right. Okay. But God, our Divine Mother, has to help all her children come through this whole process. She can't just abandon them until they're 15 or something like that. A mother, you get the baby and you have to take the baby all the way through. And that's what our Divine Mother does. So there's a lot of souls who have not yet been there and done that.
Right.
And they believe, if I had power, if I had money, if I had nuclear weapons, if I could command the military, if I could be one of those foot soldiers who gets to oppress people who are weaker than me, that's going to make me happy. And so a lot of them get to incarnate in these transitions because a lot of stuff has to be destroyed.
In order to change into the next.
In order to change to the next level. And it's just a time when two kinds of consciousness are fighting each other. which is what we see happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's really personified in the USA by, and then you get these people who know how to play it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is a fact that we have no dominant culture right now.
Mm-hmm.
And what little bit of culture there has been is just being ripped apart
Mm-hmm.
by the cynicism, and anybody who might have been a hero, we have to make sure, everybody has to make sure that everybody knows that they also were terrible
Right.
like this. There's no, church doesn't hold what it used to hold. Christianity itself doesn't hold
Mm-hmm.
what it used to hold. So as a result, the society is falling apart.
Right.
All that everybody wants is self-indulgence, pleasure, in however you want to go after it these days. Just it's all about what you can get for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So people are freaked out about that, and it's also personified by this huge migration of people from other countries and other cultures, bringing in other religions, other skin tones, other
Right.
foods, all these different things, which further, in some people's points of view, dilutes the possibility of our identity.
Right.
So you see all over countries, not just in the U.S., asserting our identity as separate from all these other entities.
Right.
And many of the people who are trying to assert that identity are people who have power.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
coming out of politics, and then it will go to military, and then it will go to war.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's over.
Hmm.
Because we're no longer in Kali Yuga, where everything is a matter of material definition. We're at the point where we're in the age of energy, where, gosh, if you're with somebody, even if their language is different, their skin tone and their culture and their religion is different, they're a lot like you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did that. There was a friend of mine in the U.S. I'm in the U.S. I don't have to point over there. These two girls were part of our congregation in Palo Alto, where I live. They're both from Finland, and they were standing in front of me. They're both, the body type was exactly the same hair, same eye color, blue, blonde.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew them both, but I was looking at them and I said, does everybody in Finland look like you? And they sort of looked at each other and said, mostly, yes. Okay, that was the first part of it. And then I've been to Finland, and there's a little more variation than that. But I'd also been reading about this huge influx of Syrian refugees into Finland.
Oh.
And Syrian refugees are black-haired and dark-eyed, and their skin is a little darker. They're not African, but their skin's darker. And of course, those Syrians are going to have children, and those children are going to go to school with the little blonde Finnish girls and boys. And sooner or later, they're going to fall in love, and guess what? They're going to make babies. Yeah. 2 generations.
Right.
The people in Finland won't be able to say this is what a Finnish person looks like.
Right.
So all the migration from so many other countries, it's all, if I'm just standing back and looking at it, if you're not freaked out by it,
right,
it's immensely interesting to see what God has in mind. If you're freaked out about it, really freaked out about, which many people are, and not only are they actually freaked out about it, but they recognize that they can stir up people with it.
Right.
And if you're looking for power, hatred is a way to get it.
Right. Well, it's so interesting. This is something that's been coming to my mind lately, and it's along the lines of what you're talking about, is all these different groups and factions, from their point of view, they're doing the right thing, which is so interesting to me, that you could have such a diversity and everybody really thinks they're doing the best thing. And it's not clear what's right, what's forward, what's back.
Well, yeah, it is clear, but it's not clear to them.
Right.
It's clear in this sense. It's clear from a divine perspective. However, now I have to, however that, we really don't learn anything from being told. You can be bullied into doing what you're supposed to do. You can be frightened into doing it. You know, churches frightened you. If you don't behave this certain way, you'll go to hell. Teresa of Avila, when she was 8 years old, she became Saint Teresa of Avila. When she was 8 years old, she persuaded one of her brothers, she had multiple siblings, and they ran away to wherever the Moors were, because it was this war between Christianity and the Moors in Spain. And she was going to be martyred. She wanted to find wherever the conflict was, and then she wanted to have her head cut off so she could just die and go to heaven. Because if you are martyred for the faith, then you immediately get to heaven. And she just looked at it rather efficiently. And thought, why risk it? I'll just go be martyred now, and it's a very powerful
Fast
force.
pass, yeah.
Yeah. If you step out of line, you're going to go to hell. So it didn't necessarily change people's consciousness, but it frightened them into behaving.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but they didn't necessarily know that the behavior they might have done otherwise was really not in their best interest. They were too frightened to try. And that's not the same as actually knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Because we always think that the decision we make is going to lessen our suffering and increase our happiness. No matter how idiotic that decision may appear to others, or even to ourselves later, we always do what we think will increase our happiness and diminish our suffering. And we have to experience it and really find out. Otherwise, we don't really know. If you're only doing it, if you're only doing it because you're afraid, that means that you think it would make you happy, but you're afraid to take it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So all of these people who are holding views that seem unwise, they believe it will make them happy to do that. Now, what they think of as happiness, that's where the right and the wrong might come from it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not being powerful and being able to execute anybody I want is really going to give me the fulfillment I think it's going to give me, eventually you will find out that it doesn't, because of the law of karma.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's contrary to that which is. It's not reality.
Mm-hmm.
We are not made to be happy when we hurt others. Our true identity, this goes back to the ancient teachings of India, Sanatana Dharma it's called, which is not religion, it's not Hinduism, it's not Christianity, it's none of those things. It's the way we are made. It's that which is. And that which is that we are one with all of creation, and when any aspect of creation is injured deliberately by me, I am diminished and therefore hurt. So what expands our self-identity is what ultimately leads us to happiness. What contracts our self-identity ultimately leads us to suffering. The caveat to that is you're not going to know until you have the experience.
Right.
But what you are doing will not ultimately make you happy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just a fact. And one of the grave mistakes we're seeing is because everybody's at a different place. And so you have to say they're doing what they need to do, but that doesn't make it good.
Right.
And that doesn't mean there is no such thing as good. Because if you pay attention to your own experience, you find out. And if you pay attention to the experience of the saints and the masters and the ancient teachings, you find out. So this person may need to have this experience, but that does not mean that experience is good in itself, and it definitely does not mean that you should support it just because they're doing it.
Right.
You just call it what it is, and you can stand back and say they're going to do it. But Yogananda himself said when he was talking about a future when we're really a global society, he said we will still need policemen because he called the global police force because there will always be bullies. And he means on an international level,
right,
which is what you see all over the world now.
Right.
And those bullies will have to be restrained because the consequences of behavior like that are that people of greater understanding restrain you.
Right.
Because you're hurting people. And higher consciousness people know that you can't be allowed to do that.
Right.
If there's a way to stop you.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, it's...
Yeah. Well, that's a question I was going to ask also. It's related. And talking about Sanatana Dharma, that which is, it's like how people I think now are just struggling. How do we navigate the sea of information? And it's like, I can have a million different opinions on any one topic.
Well, the solution I've taken is more radical than some, but I don't think it's untrue. There's no solution on that level. It's just everything is shades of gray. Now, I want to quote Swami Kriyananda here because that can also be terribly misused. Swamiji said, merely because evil exists to some extent everywhere does not mean that evil exists to the same extent everywhere. And this was actually in defense of America that he said that. And this was actually after the 9/11 attack, when there was a lot of, well, the terrorists are also our friends kind of thing.
Right.
Swami said, you know, if you have the power of love that can convert darkness into light, all you have to do is love. But if you cannot convert the darkness into light, you have to think of meeting reality more on its own level.
Right.
And in that context, people would say, well, America's done some bad things too. And then Swami wrote a very strong essay. Just because evil exists everywhere does not mean it exists in the same proportion everywhere. So we have to, like, as Swami put it, not become so open-minded that our brains fall out.
Which is interesting now because you see things that even maybe 10 years ago seemed like common sense now are like a radical idea. And I think it's just more of a sign, like you said, things are just being more and more polarized. There's no middle ground.
No, there's no middle. But in 1987, I went to India for the first time, and you arrived from the U.S. like at 3 a.m, and I was with a group, and we got on our pilgrimage bus, and we're driving through the city of New Delhi, and I'd never been outside America or Western Europe, so this was a new cultural picture. India was just at the beginning of its incredible economic rise, so 87 was very different. I looked out the window, and there were people sleeping on the median in the highway, you know, just asleep. Little families, you know, you'd see their blankets. It was like a holy something I'd never seen before. I hadn't even met the beggars or anything.
Right.
But I looked out and I thought, we have all the resources in the world. We could make this planet heaven on earth. It's completely within our hands to do it. There's nothing missing. We don't want to. And at that time, I was deep into Ananda already. I realized it's all about the human heart. Where do I think joy comes from? You know, am I my brother's keeper? Can I expand to include others' welfare in my own? All about the human heart. And I realized what I was doing, which is trying to help people to meditate and understand Sanatana Dharma, it was the most politically active thing I could choose to do. And I hold that to now. Change consciousness, and everything begins to change. But you can change the regime over and over again, and if you haven't actually changed consciousness, then the regime just rolls out the same story. Or maybe you know, the shadow goes down a little, but you haven't really made it possible for it to become light. So at this time, in the evolution of the planet, I'm working, as I have done for a long time, trying to help people learn to meditate, to change consciousness, to understand the yugas, to understand karma, reincarnation, because once you get all of those, then you automatically behave differently. And you don't do it out of fear. You do it because you know this is who I am, this is what I should be doing. And we underestimate the power of consciousness. We're extremely infatuated with guns and vehicles and things like that, but the power of consciousness is infinitely greater. So this is not nothing. It just isn't material.
Right. Which is a subtlety that we're still tuning into. And what you're saying is that if you work from the level of consciousness and change that instead, as you were talking, I got the image in my mind of, you know, if you're on the roof, got the red hat on and you're yelling at the people, then you take that off and you put the blue hat on and you're yelling, it's still the same vibration.
It's exactly the same vibration.
It's the same consciousness, same level.
Absolutely. And you're just that's why I can't participate, because I do feel that, just like Swami said, I do feel there are better and worse, and there's actually even some good. I don't think that everybody's just mediocre. There's actually some good, but you're still just moving the chess pieces around. And if you really want to actually start a new game, invent a new game, it has to come from a completely different level. Swami's answer when people would ask, should I be politically active? Should I do this? Swamiji says, if you feel drawn to it, because we all have different karma, and for some people it's important for them to take a stand in an external way for certain causes. Maybe they're correcting their own past, you never know. But he said you must do it with the consciousness of what you're trying to create. Because if you do it, there were people who had this campaign against nuclear weapons. There was a ballot initiative on the statewide for California, and the people who were behind that, they were spiritually minded people. It was a very nobly intended, and they did a good job. But the way they tried to get people on their side was by scaring the living daylights out of you about nuclear war, which is, plenty scary. Swami's response when he saw their presentation about how many hundreds of thousands would be vaporized and how many would turn to ash, and it was well done. They were very smart. He said, first he said, 100 years from now, almost no one on this planet will still be here. So he said, whether we dribble off a few at a time over the next 100 years or all go to the astral world at one time, he said, as soon as we're there, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
It only matters from this side. It doesn't matter from that side. Then he said, when your objective is peace, fear is the wrong tactic. Because you're trying to create peace, but you're actually creating fear.
Right.
And that's what you're actually creating. And so then there's fear. There's more and more fear. And fear leads to many things you don't want to have happen.
So bring this to an individual's level again.
Right.
You've been talking about acting out of fear, and even just, I guess we were talking a little about this transition from a lower to a higher age, and the changes and destruction that can kind of bring. And a lot of people, I think, are afraid to make change because it means they're going to have to destroy or let go of a lot of things that they have
something
personally.
Something will die for something new to be reborn.
Yeah.
Well, you see, this all actually comes down to atheism.
Interesting.
Or because if you think that you're in charge of your life and what you do is the only influence that there is, and if I make a wrong decision, it can be terrible. And if you're just alone in this vulnerable, ego-identified force, I think being scared to death is a really good response to that, because it's a terrifying reality, and because it's clear you cannot control it.
Right.
You can set it all up. I'm very impressed by the fact that the recent fires in Southern California, which ravaged some of the most privileged neighborhoods in that area, these were people who had figured out how to play the game, and had put out the energy and the magnetism and the talent and the focus to pull themselves up in a financial and in other kinds of ways, to establish themselves and to make their fort against the intruding forces. And this fire just came through and just ate the whole thing up, ate it all. So it's like those people did not think they were vulnerable, but we're all vulnerable.
Right.
Okay. And we know we're vulnerable and we're nervous about it. So that fear, that uncomfortableness, at some point in your many incarnations, causes you to ask, is there anything else going on here than just me and my ideas? And if you ask that question deeply enough, the universe responds to you. And then you begin to realize, I'm part of a greater reality. You begin to feel the divine force acting in your life. Ultimately, you develop a relationship with the divine. You find a teacher. All of these things happen. And then everything about your life becomes different. So even though there's still this sort of fundamental preference for the known, your life is not defined so much by what's outside you. It's defined more from what's inside of you. And the inside of you is always there. Your consciousness is always there. So the way you become less afraid of change is that you are less defined by change.
Mm-hmm.
One of the very first aphorisms I remember from Swami Kriyananda when I met him in 1969, no idea where I heard this. He said, most people fear change.
Mm-hmm.
Change is the only certainty in life. Thus, most people are afraid and unhappy.
Mm.
But it's not true. If there's no God and this whole thing is just random, and all that exists is you and your concept of what's good,
Right.
and you're just making it up, to be vulnerable and to be worried about that is the only intelligent response.
Yeah, because it's totally out of your control. You're just
Totally.
like a speck of dust.
So if you get some tiny little place where you're, you just grip it with both your hands.
Right.
And then, of course, what happens is that, truthfully, we are a drop of water determined to get to the ocean.
Mm.
All water flows to the sea.
Mm.
And on the outside, we may not look like that, but there's this drop of water, which is our own spark of divinity, which is determined to get to the sea. And if it has been enclosed by somebody's small-minded idea that we're just going to hunker down and stay here,
Right.
we're not going to get any bigger and we're not going nowhere, that little drop of water just busts against it.
Yeah.
That's karma.
Yeah.
It just forces it through. So you either see the light and are drawn toward it, or you wait to catch fire from behind and then you run away from the heat.
Yeah. One way or another.
One way or another, you're going to move. So it's really like, choose. Make a choice.
Well, it's like kind of, you were talking about earlier when you were in school and it's just easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of people, like even the idea of having a career, this 30-year thing, it's like almost like staring down the barrel of a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think would you say it's part of the human nature, the soul's nature, to want challenge, to want to be challenged, to live into their highest potential?
Absolutely. It's the balance point between aspiration and fear, between the courage to risk and the fear of failure,
Mm-hmm.
but the expansion of consciousness, the gradual awakening to our own actual potential, the deeper understanding of where happiness comes from and what causes suffering, all of those are all intertwined. And so when we think, I'll be happy if I just get this career and hold it for 30 years so I won't have any change, and that don't turn out so good, then the next incarnation, it may cross your mind that maybe this isn't a good idea, but you'll still be a little afraid and all those things will balance.
Yeah.
But yes, the soul is determined. We are destined for infinity, and we will not stop until we reach it.
Mm.
You can stall for a long time, but you can never stop.
The fire's coming.
Fire's coming. And it's your friend. It's your
Right.
own superconsciousness that pries you out of that. But that's the challenge of the whole thing. Sometimes I joke about it this way. Even if you're talking to God, people say with an angry tone, "God, why did you let this happen?"
Yeah.
And then the same question, "God, why did you let this happen?" In other words, what are you trying to teach me that I don't already know?
Mm-hmm.
And be very interested in that instead of determined never to learn anything. But see, that's where the atheism comes in. Is there a higher power? Is there a loving presence? Is there a greater wisdom? Whether I call that my own soul nature or my superconscious God talking to me, is there something more than just the smallest perception of self and reality? And that was the question I was asking from babyhood, really.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody could answer till I got the teachings of India. And then it was everything. That's what it was all about.
Yeah. Did it feel like you were taking a risk? Just going back to like when you found the teachings of yoga, and then your next step, skipping over a few steps, was to move up to a rural community.
There was a space. Because I discovered the teachings of Ramakrishna when I was just before my 19th birthday. And I met Swami Kriyananda when I was 22. So there was a few years there in which, with this group of friends, we just explored and explored. Yogananda's book was in the story, but I and my crowd, we were very intellectual, and we were somewhat sort of Vedantic purists. And he's all devotion and miracles. And it's not that it's not that I wasn't so arrogant as to reject Yogananda, but I didn't know how to relate to that. I knew how to relate much more to Vivekananda's philosophy, which was brilliantly expressed. And also, I don't know, Ramakrishna himself he was not, he was like Yogananda, just all devotion and Divine Mother. And so I read Vivekananda, but what I felt was Ramakrishna. But 3 years of serious, super serious study gradually came down to, I started reading the books about saints. I started asking the question, this is great. I have a whole new concept of life, and my life is exactly the same as it was before I had all this. Like, what the heck am I going to do? I just got up in the morning, I went to work, and went to some nothing job because I had no profession. Just did my job, came home, spent time with my friends, talked about these ideas, went to sleep, went to work the next morning. I really thought I was going to lose my mind. I just kind of quietly thought about having a nervous breakdown, but I actually literally thought about having a nervous breakdown. I was looking out the window of my apartment, and I had this picture, because I think it's a past life memory. You know, I'll just flip out in some way, which is no joke when you do that. And I would. My friends would find me. They would gradually figure out that I'd lost my mental balance. They would take me to the hospital. I'd be in the hospital for a period of time. Gradually, I'd get myself together, and I'd come back, and I'd be standing at this window, looking out the window. And it was just like, what a tremendous waste of time, energy, and money. You know, let's just not do that. But that's how I felt.
Right.
And right at that time, I met Swami Kriyananda. And he walked into the room, and he was the living personification of everything that I knew I wanted to be. And I'd never seen it before.
You just read about it.
I'd read about it, and I read all these books about saints and so on, and yogis, but like, I sure didn't have the nerve to just go to India and go into a cave. I mean, that was outside, way outside my box. And I was Jewish, so I couldn't become a Catholic nun. Nor could I become a Christian missionary, and I didn't have any other choices.
Yeah.
I was just like, and so it was just making me even crazier. And then I met Swami. And not only did I now see someone who was a living teacher that I could attach myself to, he had a community. Unbelievable, he had a community. I could just go there and do something else. And it was just like, well, it was God rescued me. It's the only word for it.
Yeah.
And from that, you know, I had a little complex karma, so it took me a little bit of time, you know, but I got there. I settled. I never looked back. Never, not for 30 seconds.
What was that like, that first year, and that, you know, that transition going from an urban city setting, Stanford, to
I was actually
woods?
I was actually living in San Francisco. I drove from San Francisco here. I'd never even been camping. I mean, you know, I was like a zero. And here I'm in this tent, you know. It took me about 24 hours.
Wow.
It was such a relief. You know, that whole world. I honestly, I feel like I just stood against the wall and watched. Because I could never quite figure out what they were doing. I mean, I was socially adjusted. I had friends. I did things you wouldn't have known looking at me. It was always a little odd, but you wouldn't have known looking at me. I didn't seem as externally tortured as I felt inside, because I was happy.
Right.
I mean, probably my soul knew that this whole thing was going to be worked out pretty soon. My mind was a little tense, but it was like I just stood there, and I never belonged to it, and I never understood it. So when I finally got to where I belonged, when the first time I came to Ananda, which was the summer before, about 9 or 10 months before I actually moved, it was the middle of the summer. It was August, and I had these sandals that I always wore, and they were kind of, I had them made. They were like a biblical sandal, so you know, just. And I remember, I can still see it. I opened the car door, I put my foot down, and it was all dust. It was super dry in the summers then. Put my foot down, and this cloud of dust came up over my foot, and it was also very biblical feeling. And what came into my mind was, this place is true, you will not be disappointed. Wow, yeah.
Just an energetic recognition.
An energetic recognition that I was home.
Mm.
I know that's not how it happens for everyone.
Right.
So let me also say that when Swami Kriyananda wrote his autobiography, which is now called The New Path, and he told the story of his own search for meaning and finding master and becoming a disciple. That book was the last book he wrote without a computer. Computers came in right after that. And I was his secretary, and I typed the manuscript for that book. So of course I didn't do anything to write it,
Right.
but I was there for the whole process. And when he was editing the first part, which is his story, I was typing for the 50th time because he edited and I typed, and I said, sir, and by that time I was working at our meditation retreat, and I was in contact with a lot of new people, so I knew what I was talking about. I said, sir, you read Autobiography of a Yogi, he was 22 in 1948, and he was in New York City. He left everything. He got on a bus. He went across the country to Los Angeles. He went right to Yogananda. He said, I want to be your disciple. He was initiated as a disciple. He was taken into the monastery. 1 week from finding Autobiography of a Yogi to living with Master. I said, Swamiji, it doesn't happen like that for people. I said, people look at it, they think about it, they're a little bit drawn, they go home, they worry about it, they talk to their friends, they come back, and then over time it gradually wins them. I said, so when you make it like this, I said, you're telling people something that almost none of them will experience. And Swami said, I know, he said, it concerned me also. He said, and I tried to find another way to tell the story, he said, except that's just how it happened. So in retrospect, I see that I too, literally, Swami walked into the room before I heard the sound of his voice. It's just, this is it for me. I knew, I recognized, it's the only word for it. I was just resuming the life that I'd had before, many times before, because that doesn't happen.
Right.
So if it doesn't happen like that, that doesn't mean that this isn't your home or whatever it might be. It's just my karma was unusual. I realize now.
Yeah. But not everybody would have that experience, but I think there's a lot of people that feel that they're waiting for their life to begin in some sense. Like they're an outsider in their own circle even. And even if it doesn't happen like that, there's some next step that they can take. Probably.
This is, it's being a truth seeker and having the courage to be a truth seeker. When we were all young hippies here, and we were responsible. I was talking about this earlier, but the phrase "the sexual revolution" was something we were immensely proud of at that time. and there was a satsang, and somebody asked Swami that question. He was a monk of a very orthodox tradition. He was completely relaxed and very natural as a person, but he did live a monastic life. And someone said, what do you think about the sexual revolution? You would expect a man in his position to be against it, but he wasn't. He said, overall, I think it's a good thing. And this, but, and then of course, in his way, Swami had a wonderful way of saying yes before he said no. So he knew that no would not be a popular answer at that point. So he said, overall, I think it's a good thing because people are making their own experience the criteria of their values. In other words, they're having the courage to seek the truth and the courage to act on what they think is true. He said they're making experience the criteria of their values. And he said, I think it's a good thing if people are honest about what their experience is. Because often we become determined to prove that we're right. And no matter what the evidence is, we keep insisting that we must be right. Or, if it doesn't quite work out now, I'll just keep doing it and it'll work out later. Provided that you're honest, which is, promiscuity and just the kind of lack of self-restraint, lack of awareness of the consequences of your behavior does not really make you happy. But nor does this absurd dogmatic repression either.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I was thinking, like the 60s, you're talking about just, I mean, obviously everybody's probably heard, just drugs and sex and rock and roll and
we were experimenting with
yeah.
Not me personally, but my generation.
Yeah.
I was too standing against the wall.
Not interested.
We just couldn't go there.
Yeah.
But it was
there's a lot of people that probably just kept on that road.
Yes, exactly. A lot of those people ended up in really hard drugs, and you still see them around, and they don't look good. Because it don't work.
Right.
There was a man, Stephen Gaskin, this wonderful guy, very exotic man. I mean, very eccentric.
Yeah.
And he was the leader of the hippie movement in San Francisco. I don't even know if his name is still known, but eventually he and all his followers got all these school buses and drove across the country and ended up starting something they called the Farm in Tennessee. And among their experiments was group marriage. They just sort of had these group marriages. Okay. Swami and Stephen Gaskin met each other, and Swami liked him because he was a true original with a lot of courage. He was a very interesting man. But anyway, I was in an informal setting with him, and someone said, I understand you've given up the idea of group marriage. Why have you given it up? And he said, because it don't work. He was an English professor, but he affected this sort of way, because it don't work. That's exactly what Swami meant.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have this great idea, we're going to try it, but it don't work. It's not the way we're made.
Yeah, and just to be honest enough with yourself and say, and not attached to it. Just say, tried it, doesn't work.
Yeah, we tried it. It was a theoretical, and we really tried it.
Yeah.
But it don't work.
You run the experiment.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are looking for more of that. And that's what spirituality is drawing them is, well, hopefully a lot more people are looking at it, but they're being drawn by their experience, like you said. They want something they can play with. They want something they can try.
And really try.
Yeah.
And not just dabble in.
Yeah.
You have to, you don't learn anything if you're superficial. This was the book when Yogananda came to America in 1920. He had a book that he didn't actually write it himself, but he directed its writing. He had a ghostwriter essentially with his own ideas because he didn't write English that well.
Yeah.
But the book was called The Science of Religion, which is to say religion is not a dogmatic exercise. A religion is try this. And then, of course, with meditation and Kriya Yoga and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and all of the things that you can actually just do yourself. You don't need a priest. You don't need a congregation. You don't need you don't have to call you don't need a denomination. You actually try it, and you see what happens, just like a scientist.
Right.
And so when you actually know it, you know it
Mm-hmm.
because you experimented, you got the results, you paid attention. This is the conclusion. And that's what spirituality is. See, the washing away of I'm a Methodist, I'm a Lutheran, I'm a this, I'm a that, is actually all to the good. Because some people in that context are a Lutheran from the inside out. But when you can't take spirituality and paste it on. Right. It's a seed that grows like a plant from inside of you. I had this experience once. I had two friends who were both, shall I say, a prominent Christian denomination, and they were both clergy, both had churches. They were both very successful in that. They became disciples of Yogananda. They thought it would be fun to bring me to one of their clergy retreats. At that time, which was quite a few years ago, they were all men except for one woman. Now it's become almost a woman's profession. But there was one woman and then there was me. And let's see, how did it go? It was Monday, and these are all clergy, so Monday's the beginning of their weekend. You know?
Yeah.
So everybody was in kind of a jocular mood because, it's Monday. And it came time to say grace before we had lunch. And there's a lot of joking back and forth about, because everybody's clergy. Who's going to say the grace, right? And so then finally it's determined that, Edward's going to say the grace. So then everybody's just being perfectly natural. Then Edward says, Lord Jesus Christ. I started to giggle because I thought we were still joking. Oh my God, he wasn't. It was, I'm myself, and now that I'm talking to God, I become somebody completely else. I started to giggle, which I had to turn into a cough because
Oops.
and it was really interesting to me because I'd only been in the context of Ananda.
Right.
I was very early in my life with Ananda. I'd never met people who put it on from the outside.
Right.
And they were very sincere and they were very nice people. My friend said afterwards, they said the whole week I was leaving, I was doing things. He said, you seemed to me the whole time like you were taking in the information, then you were translating it. And then you were trying to, I said, that is 100% exactly what I was doing. Because I couldn't figure out, it had never crossed my mind that you could be religious without being, the word I would use, without being spiritual.
Right.
But that's not quite fair to them.
Yeah.
But you know, they were trying to wear it.
It's interesting because now even with spirituality that can happen too. It's
Yes,
like,
it
oh, you don't
does.
have the right crystal and that matcha wasn't harvested organically and it's a full moon, I just can't think straight.
No, that's in fact exactly true because we're still in transition. And also because it's human nature to want to bring it down to what I already know. And what people already know is the material world. So even if they're trying to expand, habit dies hard. I mean, this is all about the chakras and karma again, and the karma in the spine, which pulls you back. But at least if you're pulling in the right direction, that's a step.
Yeah.
But I joke about it because I live in California. Not everyone in California meditates, but those who don't feel guilty because they don't meditate, which is a huge step up from the fact that when they thought it was the devil's handiwork. You know?
Yeah, lunatic fringe.
Lunatic fringe. My point of view is that, you know, when I started, we were one bubble over. Society has come through our bubble. I moved over a couple of times, but we just have to, now that society is running through the middle of a lot of things that used to be extreme, we have to keep going. We have to keep going over. We have to do the revolution in education and among others. That's perhaps the most important, and we have to really do it. We just have to have the courage to just say, this is not education. This is, and especially nowadays, this is like such a joke. It's like by the time you graduate, everything you know is obsolete.
Yeah.
So it's like information will not give you education. You'll just spend a lot of time and money learning things that, and without to speak of AI, which is just eating up all these jobs that people did not think would be eaten up. It was one thing for the factory worker to be replaced by a robot. It's very hard for the computer programmer to be replaced by another computer, which is to say, it's who you are inside, what kind of self-mastery, the courage, the creativity, the determination, the attunement, the intuition. That's education. And you learn the stuff. You have to learn to read. You have to enjoy these things.
Those are, that leads me to a question I wanted to, which I think will like kind of tie a lot of those things together, is that, you know, you give a lot of public lectures and you travel around the world and prolific on YouTube and just for decades. Like, what is your process for preparing for a class and giving a class even, and how does that relate to creativity, inspiration, and like attunement you just kind of mentioned there?
I'll tell you a little bit. I'm not the best one to answer this because I'm not quite sure how it works. However, but this is what I'll say. I study all the time. Not study in the sense of, you know, pulling my hair out and trying to get ready for the quiz. I'm immensely interested in the subjects that I share. It's a passion of mine to understand Swami Kriyananda's writings, to understand Yogananda's writings, to practice the teachings in my own life all the time. That doesn't mean I'm that good at it. That's very important to say. I practice, but the pole star of my life is very clear to me. So I lead a very integrated life. No matter what I'm doing, I'm always comparing it to where I'm trying to go. I'm always trying to understand things. When I started, which was 5 decades ago, I prepared my classes. I mean, I would write notes and I would write outlines and so on like that. Gradually, things came down to more like I would have a few points. But the way Swami Kriyananda really trained us is you're not trying to tell people what you know. You're trying to help them hear what they need to know in order to take their next step.
Mm.
Now, in order to do that, you have to have some fund of knowledge because I'm not going into trance and channeling some astral being. This is my own intelligence that's being used. So I've worked very hard to train my intelligence and my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm actually anywhere, whether I'm talking counseling to one person or a room of many, my purpose in being there is to tell them what they need to know, not merely what I already know.
Right.
So that has to be very much intuitive.
Right.
And however, you have to have something to draw from for that intuition. Mm. So if you've prepared an entire class completely thoroughly, but when you stand up there to speak, you can't remember the outline, or the outline doesn't feel right, the fact that you did that gives you the capacity to be intuitive. Sometimes people think, well, you're being intuitive, I don't need to know anything. I had that experience because in one very early lecture tour that I took, I was traveling with Shivani. She's a founding member of Ananda. She's lived in Europe for the last 30-some years. We were here together. Mm. The first trip we took together. It wasn't my first, but an early trip. And she has always had this passionate interest in healing. In fact, just recently she published a definitive 3-volume set of all of Yogananda's healing techniques. Even back in our early 20s, that was her passion.
Wow.
It's never been mine. Plus, Shivani had it covered. So we went on this tour together, and I had my subjects, and hers was primarily all of this spiritual healing. Her husband was a contractor. He was on a job, and he started really getting in trouble on that job. Mm. So we're on I think a 6-week tour, and about week 2, she has to leave because she helps him with the business side. She just had to go and rescue him. So we have the whole program set. So I have all her healing classes. So she leaves me all her notes, which don't make any sense to me. Shivani and I are soul sisters, but our brains are really, really different. So I have all her notes, and I try to read them. They just don't mean anything to me. But I have a good mouth on me, so I can, Mm-hmm. So I'm in front of this small group in, I think it was Longview, Washington. And I start talking a little bit about this subject. It's very interesting to me. I can feel that the room wants more on that subject, but I have reached the end of my understanding. And it was almost like silently I had to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just don't know any more than this. And I had to go on to the other little bits and pieces that I did know. But I've never forgotten that. And so it's like my preparation is to always know when somebody needs something, to either know it or know enough that I can find intuition to answer it. Right. But the intuition is not guessing. Right. I never guess, unless I say what I call the gospel according to Asha, which is very unreliable. But this is, this is what I think about that idea. Yeah. But so it's immensely interesting to do it that way, because you don't just get your lecture set and deliver it. It's not like a college course like that. However, you can't be presumptuous. You really can't be presumptuous. Shivani's prayer used to be, Lord, you have no mouth and I have no brain, so the two of us can work together and
make a good team.
A good team.
It's been really interesting to sit down for this interview with you too, because and just experiencing that, it's like I'm waiting to ask the question, and then you start answering the question I was going to ask. Yeah, so
well, there you have it.
It's like the thoughts are just swimming out there.
Yeah, the thoughts are universal. That's exactly right. And so here we are.
Yeah.
And we're attuned to each other, so naturally it flows. When people get they think this is something unusual. It's not unusual at all. It's happening all the time.
Mm.
It's just that one decides consciously to behave this way. And you have to separate yourself from yourself. If you think it's, well, look how good I am at this, then you can't do it. Because it's the opposite of what's in me. It's simply what's there to be understood. How can I serve? That's the main thing, is how can I be helpful? And you just, as one of my other friends put it, he said, you're just sharing with people you like about something you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the primary rule of this is don't ever talk about something you don't know. and don't ever pretend to know something you don't know. Just no matter how
people feel it.
There was a friend once, when we were all very new at this, he gave a Sunday service, and for some reason he chose as his, this is like, I'm talking in the early 70s, he chose as his subject the difference between Sabbakalpa and Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Samadhi being cosmic consciousness, one being a certain stage of cosmic consciousness, the other being the other. I mean, you cannot get farther away from where any of us were standing. And he also did not know what I have since learned is called the first law of holes, which is when you find yourself in a hole, you stop digging. So he just launched into this, and and he was deep in a hole, and he just did not know how to get out of it.
Digging.
He just kept digging. I mean, it was beyond the beyond. But I said, don't ever go beyond what you actually know.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing about just all this in general is, standing in front of a large group of people is not different than just somebody says to you, how do you pray? What's the secret of prayer? I'm struggling with my meditation. How do I work on it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by the guru? And if somebody just walks up to you and asks, you don't say, give me 2 days to study.
Yeah.
You just say what you already know.
Mm.
So I feel one of the most important things in doing this kind of work, start with what you already know. You can enhance it by reading some books so you have some fresh ideas in your mind, but you can't learn it from that book unless you already know it.
Mm.
And what we already know is always going to be interesting to somebody, because there's always somebody who doesn't yet know it.
And it goes back to energy almost. We're in the age of energy, and it's just feeling the other person's energy. When you lecture, you probably feel the audience's energy of what they want, and that somehow translates into a thought.
Right. It's not a conscious effort anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it was never a conscious effort, because it's not, tuning in like that. Yeah, exactly. It's just more. It just occurs to you to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mean, I've had a lot of years to practice this, but it's become, for me to grow in doing this, the way I think about it is, if I'm only teaching from memory, and I can tell when that's happening, and it doesn't happen very much anymore. It's like I will think I have talked for 30 minutes, and 4 minutes has gone by. It's just like, it's so tedious. But when I'm in a flow, I'm just in a flow. There's times I look up and, it's an hour. I didn't even know. It's not that I was unconscious or anything, but it was just, I don't know where the ideas come from. They're just there.
Mm. We've been in a nice flow now, about an hour and a half.
Okay. Well, you don't say 4 minutes has gone by.
And one last question, since you kind of mentioned Polestar and cosmic consciousness, and this is actually the first time this set piece is here.
Oh, look at that.
And so I was thinking maybe it'd be nice to mention it a little bit.
Oh, look at that's beautiful.
Could you explain what that is a little bit?
Well, this is an artistic rendition of a universal reality, which is when, in meditation we talk about concentrating at the point between the eyebrows, which is not crossing your eyes and looking up. In a real sense, it's rather that there's this power in front of us, and we're extending ourselves into it. And universally, this is what you see. You don't necessarily see it as vividly as this is, but it's a ring of light, a dark field, and a light spot in the center, which when you see it super clearly, it turns into a 5-pointed star. And this is what the spiritual eye is. Now, I'm not able to give you there's a lot of things that can be said about it, but it's the light that draws you to a greater sense of reality than where we are now. I mean, we have full superconsciousness within us, and this is not an external reality. This is a reflection of our own greater awareness. Whenever I'm guiding people to begin to meditate, I think of it, you're not going back inside of yourself. You're basically releasing yourself to expand into this reality. I think of it like if you were watching the sun rise over a mountain peak out in front of you, a little above where you are, and your eyes just automatically go up, and you can feel it. Everything goes into it.
Right.
And we're talking about straightening the spine, but what's really happening, it's not the spine that you're straightening, it's the heart that's rising. And if you open your heart and let your heart rise, not inside, not internally up the spine, but expand out into creation, your posture automatically goes. Your shoulders go down and back, and your spine goes straight. And it's more dynamic than trying to pull your spine out.
Right.
But all of that is that instead of remaining confined and thinking of yourself as somehow inside this body, we recognize ourselves as a flow of energy. And if the sun is rising, it's attractive to you. So what happens when this light begins to appear? It's attractive to us, but not like we physically run to it, but like our energy goes to it. Just think if someone that you love and you haven't seen in a while comes, it's just as soon as you see them, you see your wife at the end of the day, you very sweetly just look over to her, but you see your wife at the end of the day, your heart opens and you expand to include her. That's exactly what we're doing here. We're just expanding into this world, and it's worth doing.
Yeah.
It changes everything. Yeah, it just changes everything.
That's beautiful. I think that takes us right back to that awakening that's happening around the planet as people are feeling that and expanding into it. And we can go on for hours. So thank you so much. This was beautiful. I think we got some good stuff.
Very, very enjoyable conversation, Jonica. Thank you for asking.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
It's been great fun.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys.